Hi everyone, and welcome to this seminar on engagement and motivation, in which we look at how we can best improve learning outcomes. My name's Lucy Hodge. I'm a solutions consultant with Walkgrove, and in my free time I'm also a PhD student in which I'm learning about technology-enhanced learning, which is part of the background to the research I've been doing here. Okay, to start with, in this presentation, I'll be looking at motivation. We find out that it's the key to learning success. I'm sure we all know that people who are most motivated are the people who are most likely to succeed. There are, of course, some edge cases in which people who are just naturally great at everything, and, we all feel a bit about them. But apart from that, the more motivated you are, the more likely you are to succeed. So the question is, can we design courses that really motivate users to actually learn? Frequently, when we talk about motivation, we think about, are they completing the course? Are they getting that done? But that may not be the best way to go about things. So the next thing, learner engagement. How does that play into motivation? We talk quite a lot about learner engagement when we're designing courses, whether they're face-to-face, whether they're blended courses, whether they're online courses. We think about how do we really engage learners with the material. The question is, how does that really factor into motivation? And then finally, how are we able to best improve learner outcomes? So we'll start off by looking at motivation, which is, we all know what motivation is. It's really the drive to succeed. It's the drive to achieve something. We all know when we're feeling motivated, whether that's to go out on a nice trip somewhere, to catch up on TV, or to actually, get the housework done because you've got a guest staying. You're motivated in those cases. But motivation isn't actually that straightforward. So here we'll look at a couple of types of motivation. So there's the intrinsic motivation. That's where the person doesn't require any external incentives. So you want to clean not because your friend's coming over, but because you like living in a really clean house. That person, they're intrinsically motivated. Doesn't matter what else is going on, they're going to do the thing. And some people are intrinsically motivated to learn. I imagine that everybody out here watching my presentation is intrinsically motivated to learn, which is a great thing. You all want to find things out. You're here because you want to be. And that's a great thing. On the other hand, we've got extrinsic motivation, and that's what we look at more when we're designing training courses. Here, the individual isn't motivated by an intrinsic means. They're not here because they want to be. They're here because maybe they've been made to come. Maybe they think there's some other thing out there that's really great that's made them want to do this, but it's not because the thing in itself is really interesting and exciting to them. They're actually here for another reason. Perhaps it's they've got CPD training, they need to collect some points towards it. Maybe they've been sent here to just gather some information from their organisation. In some cases, learning will happen anyway. It doesn't matter that it's been extrinsically motivated. Generally, it's not the final aim of the people who are taking a course. They're just there because there's another incentive for them to do so. So how does motivation link to engagement? I think we often think about it really being kind of the same thing, but it isn't. They are two very different things. While there is an interplay between them, we need to make sure that when we're talking about motivation, we're talking about that drive, which is different to engagement. So as you can see there, the motivated individuals, they're concerned with the overall outcome, and they want to learn. And that's what we talk about as intentional learning. Now, engaged individuals who are doing a course, they may not be motivated at all. They may not be motivated to learn in the slightest. But if they find what's going on really interesting, then they'll be paying attention. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to learn just because they're not intending to. If you have a great course with great design and you have an engaged individual, they can still learn, and that's known as incidental learning. So looking more at the relationship between motivation and engagement, the people that are best at being engaged are the intrinsically motivated individuals. So we've seen already they're basically best at everything. They are most easily engaged because they really want to learn. It doesn't actually have to be that great, doesn't have to be that interesting or engaging in itself. Because they are motivated to learn, they'll go for it anyway. Extrinsically motivated individuals, they can be more easily engaged if the learning is helpful to them. So for example, if they want to go for a promotion, if they know that they need to learn these skills because it will improve their outcomes at work, then they can, again, be more easily motivated because there's something they want to get out of it. Unmotivated individuals are the hardest to engage because they don't really want to be there at all. There are no goals that they feel that they're getting out of with the training, and really, it's going to be a struggle. You're going to need all the bells and whistles to get them hooked in, and is it worth it? Again, when motivation fails, as we've seen there, engagement is more important. But one of the things that's interesting is that for mandatory training courses, many, not all, organisations spend as little money as they can and just get it out of the way as quickly as possible. People are frequently not very motivated to do the mandatory training. And so they're very unengaged already. They're not really going to get anything out of it when you come to the end. So really, if you've got something that's mandatory and you want people to learn from it, that's where you need to ramp up the engagement. So here we've got a nice little table which shows the unmotivated individual versus the motivated, and the unengaged and the engaged. So basically, this is the box you do not ever want to fall into. The learner is not motivated, they're not connecting with the material, their learning outcomes are going to be, frankly, quite dreadful, and it's very common with mandatory work-based training. With the unmotivated individual, if they're engaged, at least the course is holding their interest. And learning, it's incidental learning, not intentional learning, but it is possible. So if the course quality is high, if you're using great instructional techniques, you're chunking the learning, you're making it easy to remember, then people will learn something. Now with your motivated individual, which is what we're aiming for, even if they're unengaged, they're still connecting with the material, but it will occur suboptimally. We really want to get the learners engaged. This is where we want to get to. The learner is driven to learn and is paying attention to the course. Everything's been designed in a really instructionally great way. People learn very easily. It's an optimal learning environment, and that's your most likely chance of success. Unfortunately, there's a lot of training, as I said, particularly mandatory training I've designed, which I know will probably fall into that category. It's not great, but it happens. This is where we want to aim. If we can't get there, we either want to motivate the learners or engage the learners. Now, there are lots of challenges to developing motivated learners, and I'm sure that people will have encountered many of these. So learners have poor experiences of past training initiatives. I'm sure that learning and development professionals have gone into organisations and they've looked at what's been delivered before and thought, oh my goodness, how has anybody done that? That's dreadful. And learners will have thought exactly the same. They'll speak to people and think, oh, it's really boring, it's really dry, it takes a load of time, I don't see the point, why am I doing it? So again, that's through poorly designed training initiatives and where the training is frankly quite unengaging. Very important, learners don't perceive the benefits of the training. Mandatory training is mandatory because it's actually really important. So that fire safety training that you think, oh, that's really quite pointless, it's critical because nobody wants to die in a fire. So really, when people look at it, they look at that and see tick box exercises, but that kind of training shouldn't be the tick box. Actually, it's pretty key. And again, when there's no reinforcement at work, so for example, you've been and you've studied your course, you finished it, well, what am I doing with this? What real benefits have I seen? Am I going to remember this? Am I going to go, and would it be better for me to just search on the internet to find out how to do this at a later stage? No time is set aside for training. Now, if you're learning in a classroom-based system, frequently time will be set aside. But say you've been moving from face-to-face training to an e-learning solution, frequently organisations just don't set that time aside. People are expected to do it in their free time, on their lunch break, fit it in around their normal daily work, and that's not the most motivational thing. Somebody's sitting there thinking, well, I've got 30 minutes left of my lunch break and I've got to do this piece of training, otherwise I don't get accredited, or it's not a great situation. So people don't think about the value of really setting aside time. And most importantly, and something I'll touch on again later, is a lack of a workplace learning culture in which learning isn't respected and training courses are seen as a chore. Frequently, that's where you haven't got the tone at the top, you haven't got buy-in from your senior managers. They know that they have assistants doing the e-learning for them. People know that they're leaving it to the very last minute. There's no real benefit seen. It's, again, just we need to get this completed, we need to get this done. And if a learner's in an environment like that, it's going to be a real challenge to motivate them because they don't see any real value. So now we'll have a look at what we can do to actually motivate people. Now we've looked at the horrible challenges and how difficult it is. One of the key theories behind motivation is self-determination theory by a couple of guys called Edward Deci and Richard Ryan from the University of Rochester. They've done an awful lot of empirical research and they've looked at the different learning outcomes for differently motivated learners. Now we looked at intrinsic and extrinsic. In fact, they break it down further. So it's a whole spectrum that goes from purely intrinsic right through to the lowest level of extrinsic motivation down to amotivation, so people who are completely unmotivated. Now, if you're looking at sort of a carrot and stick situation, those people tend to be quite low down on the motivational scale. Whereas some people, even though they're extrinsically motivated, it actually kind of ties in with what they want and their own intrinsic use. So what they've done is they've identified 3 things that they think are necessary to get learners motivated. Some of this is hard to implement in a workforce situation, but it's something you can always aim for. So the 3 things they've said are competence, relatedness, and autonomy. So for competence, it's really providing an opportunity for learners to master an activity. People like to feel that they're getting better at something. They like to feel a sense of accomplishment. People who feel that they're competent in something or they can gain competence are more likely to be motivated to do something because you feel great about yourself. Well, I've done that. I've mastered that. People are happy when they pass tests. People are happy when they learn to drive. They're happy when they gain accreditation. You know, that's a great thing. They feel that they've really learned something. Relatedness. Again, this ties back to organisation. You need to support learners by providing a proper learning environment that fosters social connections, makes people feel socially supported. And finally, autonomy. Put people in control. The intrinsically motivated learners feel completely in control. They know what they want to do, and that is learn. They're going to get the most out of everything. So make them understand that why the learning is important, and then they can make up their own minds about it. They can say, well, actually, I do really want to learn this. I think this is incredibly valuable. Another model, which people here may well be familiar with, have people heard of the ARCS model of motivational design? I'm seeing some nods here in the audience. So that's by John Keller, and ARCS stands for Attention, Relevance, Confidence, and Satisfaction. And again, it's quite linked to Deci and Ryan's work. These are the 4 things that Keller thinks help you build motivation in a learner. Number 1, attention. Now, it's split down into perceptual arousal or inquiry arousal. So perceptual arousal, that's basically grabbing people's attention, perhaps by playing a loud noise, telling a joke, something that gets them hooked like that. They see something interesting. Inquiry arousal is, I would say, superior. That's where you make somebody really want to learn something because they want to find out more. They say, okay, right, this is what it seems to be about, so how can I find out more? Relevance. That's number 2. People really need to understand the relevance of the training. If they're going to become intrinsically motivated, they need to see why this is relevant to them in their specific situation. Again, that's something I'll look at a bit more later, but without understanding why the learning is important, people who aren't intrinsically motivated are just not going to be motivated. Why are they going to be taking it? What does it mean to them? How is it relevant to their work? How is it relevant to their general life or their goals? Confidence. providing learners with the information they need to identify their chance of success. That's why you get all those lists at the start saying, here's what you're going to learn, here's how long it's going to take you, here's what you have to do. And sometimes it can feel quite repetitive, but it has a very sensible reason for it, so people can go and say, well, actually, this is achievable in this amount of time, here's what I'm going to learn, ties in again to relevance. People have confidence that they can complete it, they understand why it's going to happen. And finally, satisfaction, designing a rewarding experience. Engagement, again, ties into that. Do they feel rewarded? Do they feel that they've gained something at the end of the experience? Whether it's I've gained more knowledge or I've gained something that will be a stepping stone to further my career, further my personal life. Okay, so how do we really build in motivation? It's probably not really possible. What we're talking about more is the alignment of motivation. Alignment of things from what you're doing as an organization or within the course to what the learner really wants to do. So the ways we can do this, contextualizing the learning, that's something that we've just mentioned, building in relevance. What is in it for them? They need to know on a very personal level. So not just a this is good because, but it's a why is this good for me? So making things role specific, for example, making sure that the training that you're offering is really tailored to the organization and really tailored to the individual. If they can see and they understand why it's going to be important, you've contextualized the learning for them. Similarly, you can create a real personal connection if you use, for example, scenarios that really relate to the situation that a person's in. There are other techniques that can be used. I think some LMSs, for example, or some learning programs allow people to enter their names and they're addressed as per them. Or they can design their own learning path. These are things that can really help motivate learners. Gamification. This is something, again, quite a buzzword. I think gamification is great. Essentially, it applies the trappings of games. It doesn't necessarily have to be a game itself. Again, what gamification is trying to do is align with intrinsic motivations and provide extrinsic motivations. So people who enjoy games will probably just want to do it and complete it. That might be an extrinsic motivation. Other people will like to explore things, to find out more information. Perhaps they're competitive and they want to get on the top of that leaderboard. Perhaps there are some in-work benefits that they can see. And gamification, through the use of things like avatars, leaderboards, scoring, time-based things, there's a whole host of things that can help build in motivation, and that's really what we're doing. And if the motivation doesn't come, hopefully it will engage them, because it might be more interesting than the simple click-through e-learning that they might be used to. And rewards for success. Now, this is something that's quite easy to implement. It doesn't come that high up the engagement structure. So at your very lowest level, you've got certification, yes, I've passed. At a more meaningful level, perhaps that has a professional relevance. And at the top level, there could be financial or job-related rewards. It may be that completing a course is a stepping stone to a promotion or opens out your job opportunities at a later stage. And again, that can be very motivational. And really, we come to the crux of things, creating a learning culture. If you don't have an organization that backs up your learning, you're going to really struggle to motivate people. Except for those intrinsically motivated learners, which all of you are, who are here because you want to be here, you want to learn something, those people are really going to struggle. If it's not valued within an organization, why will people complete the training? How will you motivate them, and how will you engage them? One of the things that's most important is making sure that training initiatives are beneficial. Many people, they see a problem and they throw some training at it. What I'm saying is that may not be the best thing to do. Training in a structured way is not always the answer to your problems. If it's not important, don't do it. Find another way. Is this something that could in fact be dealt with better by on-the-work coaching? Is it something that could be done better, in fact, by looking and targeting training with a specific individual rather than putting a broad plan in place? Make time for learning. Again, I can't emphasize that enough. If you don't build in that time for training within the week, people won't do it. People won't respect it and value it. If you say, we set aside half a day a month, half a day, 2 months. And in that time, you can do learning, you can do training, perhaps even open it up. It doesn't necessarily have to be structured training. Perhaps your learners can suggest a topic that they're interested in. They can go and look at other resources. Not everything has to be a training initiative. It doesn't all have to be a course. If you look at organizations like Google, for example, who have a half a day a week where people sort of get blue sky thinking time, people are really productive because they feel my ideas are valued, my thoughts are valued. You want to do the same thing for training. Use mistakes as learning opportunities. I think that frequently we're frightened of letting learners make mistakes. We feel they don't want to make mistakes, they'll feel bad if they do, so let's make that assessment quite easy. Let's make sure everybody can really get an 80% pass rate here. But mistakes are some of our best learning opportunities. I think using inline questions and making sure that things aren't trivial makes a massive difference. It also makes people feel that they've achieved something. If something's quite easy and they complete it, oh, well, I've skipped through it, it was all really easy, really straightforward, I knew all the answers already, they don't feel like they've really achieved something. They don't feel that satisfaction that we looked at in the ARCS model. Whereas if you actually challenge learners and you say, okay, these questions, it doesn't really matter if you get them wrong because they're learning opportunities. You know, if you're taking a training course, you're in a safe environment. This hasn't actually had an impact on a customer. This hasn't had an impact on a situation. So you've made a mistake. How can you learn from it? And again, making assessments meaningful. Too easy, what's the point? Everybody passes. Sure, if you need that for a tick box activity, perhaps you need to look at and say, well, what are we doing? What's the purpose of this? Why do we need everybody to pass? Why do we need everybody to get this? Again, it should be made a conversation between employees, their line managers. Why didn't you do so well on this? What was the reason? And by looking at that, you can then help go and rebuild your training. You can look at what you're doing within your organizational culture. It makes a big difference. And similarly, celebrating successes. Recognition of any form can be really highly motivating. People want to feel that if they've achieved something, that it's recognized. They want people to know, I've done a great job. And any sort of recognition can make a big difference. And again, without having a learning culture, you're not going to get recognition for success in training. Nobody will care. So building up a learning culture where people really feel, okay, I've done this and I've learned something from it, great. That's really what we want to aim for. Okay, so hopefully haven't taken too long here. So here's a summary of things I think can be really, really helpful. So firstly, actually spending time on training needs analysis. It's something that quite a lot of organizations pay lip service to. They say, oh, we kind of need some training for this, let's do it. Really, why are you doing it? What are the benefits you're going to get from it? What is your organizational culture like? What are your learners like? What motivates them? What will they see a benefit from? Not just the organization, how will they see that as a personal benefit? If you can't make a case to the learners, they're not going to be motivated. And your training needs analysis should enable you to make that case to your learners, not just your stakeholders, not just the L&D professionals in your business. It's about making the case to the learners. And again, focus. Let's not focus on course attendance or completion. You know, sometimes it's necessary, but in the majority of cases, really, you want to look for measurable learning outcomes. It's not have they got 8 out of 10 in this assessment. It's have the behaviors that they've learnt and the information that they found out helped them in their day-to-day work. So that's where your performance appraisals come in. That's where your one-to-ones come in. That's where learner engagement with their management comes in. People need to see, yes, everybody else cares about how I'm doing in these things. They've seen how this training has transferred into the business. And a tick sheet at the end of an e-learning or face-to-face training course, sure, people say, yes, I've learned something. I know a lot more than I used to. Yes, this was great. This was helpful. What's the real impact? As I said earlier, minimize tick box activities. There are some things that are compulsory for a reason. So, for example, if you're working in a financial organization, then anti-money laundering, for example, that's something that's required. You have to do it. There's no two ways about it. But make them the most engaging. Everybody has to do it. but you want people to actually get something out of it at the same time, rather than just passing it off and saying, well, they've all got to do it. Look at it and say, how can we get people interested so they learn despite themselves? Because they're probably not intrinsically motivated. Let's see what we can do to make them learn anyway. Again, linked to this, remember that learner engagement in high-quality courses, it improves learning outcomes across the board. Even if there isn't that real motivation, if you design good courses, and those courses are engaging, they use great instructional techniques, then people will learn things even incidentally. And they'll come away, if they're engaged, they'll feel positive about the training experience. They'll be more open to more training experiences in the future. And finally, and most importantly, provide learners with organizational support. Create that learning culture. Make people understand that learning is valued, that they really get benefits from it, not just for the organization, but also from them. Okay, does anybody have any questions? If not, that's absolutely fine. I'm with Walkgrove. We're at the stand just there, number 13. And so if you'd like to come and speak to me later or to any of the other members of the Walkgrove team, we'd love that. We're also putting out a white paper that's based on this presentation. So that will be out on our website. So again, come and talk to us. That talks in more detail and provides some useful references, books and articles that you can go and read about this so you can find out some more about the theory and how to implement it. So thank you all very, very much for your time. Very much appreciated. Enjoy the rest of the conference.